Army released a statement that 21 officers and a number of soldiers were arrested in connection to a coup attempt in the country. There's an ongoing search to capture the remainder of those involved. And to talk us through this matter and give further insights into this coup attempt is Ayesha Kajee, independent political analyst. Assalamu alaikum, Ayesha. Welcome to the program.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you.
So, what exactly and why is it that there was this coup attempt? Just last week, we heard, a few days ago, in fact, about a coup attempt in, was it Tunisia or Algeria? I've got my countries mixed up there, but definitely North Africa.
Yes, there've been a surge of coup attempts around the continent, I think, because of militaries that see the opportunity to seize power. However, in Sudan, the situation is slightly different in that the military was very firmly behind the former dictator Omar al-Bashir, who is currently incarcerated. And this appears to be an attempt by loyalists of the Bashir regime to reinstate that regime, reinstate even perhaps Mr. Bashir. So it's intensely worrying because currently the transitional government in Sudan is a combination military civilian transitional government, which by now ought to have become a civilian government, except that the process of transition has been delayed due to the necessity for first negotiating various peace deals with rebel factions in different parts of the country, including in Darfur and in East Sudan, etc. So this delay, I think, has led to a lot of frustration amongst supporters of the revolution that happened in 2019, which led to this transitional government. However, even more worrying, as I said, is that there are perhaps elements of this transitional government who have been involved in this coup attempt. And it's been a while in the planning. The senior leaders of the government, including Prime Minister Hamdok, were aware of the rumors of a coup. They allowed it to go ahead because they wanted to try to identify who the plotters were. And it appears that they have succeeded because at least 21 officers, as you say, have actually been arrested, and up to another 20 or even 30 more people have currently been arrested. The latest information is that more than 40 people in total have been rounded up and are currently in detention.
Do you believe that that was a wise move in allowing the coup to go ahead? It could have gone horribly wrong, couldn't it?
It could have. Initially, indications were that the plotters were trying to take over the state media. They were also in the vicinity of the airport, and they were in the vicinity of the arms storage in the twin city to Khartoum, which is just across the river, called Omdurman. So indications were that it was quite carefully planned, but I think the retaliation by those members of the armed forces currently in the Military Transitional Council, including former warlord Mohammed Daglo, popularly known as Hemeti, they managed to contain and control the would-be coup plotters, which was fortunate. But as you say, yes, it could have gone in the opposite direction. I think there was anxiety that perhaps Hemeti himself might be involved, given that he has changed sides so often in the recent past, and given that he's very powerful and he's got control of the so-called rapid support forces in Khartoum, previously known as the Janjaweed, these irregular militia, if you will, which have not yet been incorporated into the regular army. And there are many of them, they're powerful, and he certainly has their loyalty. So there was, I think, anxiety that there might be a change of direction from him. However, he's come out quite strongly in saying he will only support a democratic handover of power, which is encouraging, but he is still someone who needs to be brought to book at some point.
Okay, warlords do play a crucial or a critical role in the country, as they do in most Middle East and North African countries. Are there threats from other warlords perhaps joining forces with the coup leaders? And hopefully the coup has been squashed. How does Sudan move forward? What do you see this outcome looking like?
Well, I think the only way for Sudan to move forward is really to speed up that transition to a civilian administration, while simultaneously trying to address the chronic economic issues in the country. There were closures, for example, of Port Sudan last week. And Port Sudan is the major port in the country through which most goods enter the center of the country, come into Khartoum and the Nile region. So that kind of closure really affects the economic circumstances within the country, which are already dire. And the closures were really as a result of protests that this transitional council and particularly Prime Minister Hamdok have been too lenient towards the former Islamists, have not made sufficient progress towards a secular government that is not dominated by those who wish to impose some form or the other of Sharia law, including prohibitions, for example, on alcohol for non-Muslims, etc. So there are moves to, or there's certainly indications that Prime Minister Hamdok and his government need to move towards a more secular administration, towards civilian rule, which is not dominated by the military elements in the transitional government like Hemeti, which is currently the case. And yes, there are warlords elsewhere in the country, though it is unlikely that they would join a loyalist coup unless they were really, really totally frustrated with this transitional council. For example, in the Kordofan area, closer to the south of the country, which is oil rich, there is still a large contingent of militia that hasn't been demobilized, has not yet been disarmed, and needs to be brought into this transitional process towards a democratic dispensation.
Finally, my last question for you, Ayesha, is the issue around Sharia law being introduced. Do you think that might be one of the reasons why there was one of the reasons for this coup attempt?
Well, it's one of the reasons for this coup attempt, in that those who were plotting this coup would like to see Sharia law brought back into Sudan. Currently, there are compromises being made between the old system, the Bashir system of Islamist rule / Sharia law, and a more democratic, more secular dispensation that basically allows freedoms, at least to those who are not Muslim in the country. Sudan is largely Muslim, but the interpretation of Sharia law as designated by the old regime, by these coup plotters, is one that is not palatable, for example, to the majority of women in the country, because it is a very repressive, patriarchal form of so-called Sharia law, which is not congruent, really, with the Islamic prophetic example.
Okay, that's where we leave it. Thank you indeed for your insights. I have no doubt we'll be talking again with you sometime soon. Go well. Have a great day, and salamu alaikum to you.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Jazakallah khair.
That was Ayesha Kajee. She is an independent political analyst specializing on the African continent, obviously African politics. And right now, 8:50, and we have our next guest, Crystal Groman, who is standing by for her interview with us right here on Salam Media.